Hi everyone, I'm Dr.Animaction, and welcome to another Top 10-ish list. In last week's list, I talked about my choices for the top 10 hero leaders from 80's action cartoons, so I thought it was only fair to do a sequel sort of thing and look at the villain leaders today. Just like with the previous list, these are pretty much all based on which characters I think are the coolest, as supported by some surface-level analysis of their traits and behaviors as leaders. These being villains, the questions I'll be asking essentially are, how good are they at scheming, and how megalomaniacal are they? But enough about that, let's get going. These are the top 10 villain leaders in 80's action cartoons. Number 10, Psykill from Challenge of the GoBots. Okay, so we're starting this list off a little lame. I'll admit that. There's so many villains out there to choose from, there's a good chance that you saw this entry and inwardly groaned. GoBots was a ripoff of a show trying to capitalize on the popularity of the Transformers, and that shone through in everything about them. Plus, this guy looked pretty stupid. Okay, I was going to talk about the fact that he really always has some grand scheme and yada yada yada, but I've already talked myself out of it. He's too lame. Off the list. So instead, number 10 is... Number 10. Again. Emperor Krulos from Dino Riders. Okay, I hope the Psykill didn't leave a bad taste in everyone's mouth. I've decided to bump him in favor of a big frog. Krulos is the leader of the Rulons, and, well, that's about it. He's mean to his subordinates, angry at how unfair it is he can't rule everything, and constantly trying to get one over on the Dino Riders. There's not really anything about him that makes him stand out amongst his contemporaries. Well, except he rides a T-Rex in battle armor. And really, that's why he's on the list. T-Rex, battle armor, frog guy, stir and bake. Recipe for a solid villain. Number 9, Skeletor from He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. If I was making a list of the top 10-ish most annoying voices... Hold on a second. Note to self, annoying voices... Okay, sorry. If this list were about annoying voices, then Skeletor would be a contender for the top spot. But it's not. It's about villain leaders, of which Skeletor is one. He's not a great one, though. Sure, he's always got a scheme in the works, but for some reason, he always seems surprised when He-Man shows up to stop him. It's almost like he designs his plans to be unstoppable except by some mostly naked guy with super strength, and then he's shocked when that happens. In the grand scheme of things, he's pretty incompetent. And his henchmen, well, they're also pretty incompetent, except for Evil Lyn, and maybe Triclops. So yeah, he's an iconic villain, but overall, not a great villain leader. Number 8, Cobra Commander from G.I. Joe. Hey, speaking of incompetent, here's Cobra Commander. This list is off to a great start with two of the absolute biggest names in 80's action cartoons sitting at the bottom. But if we're being honest, it's really where they belong. Cobra Commander as a leader, he just kinda sucked. He was whiny, prone to tantrums, and constantly shifting blame for failures he often caused. Remember the Synthoid conspiracy? He's the one that destroyed all the Synthoids. Same with the Mass Device. He used it to basically destroy itself. And the Pyramid of Darkness too. Same thing. I guess G.I. Joe really didn't ever need to do much except make him throw a big enough fit to break his toys. Which was the reaction he almost always obliged them with. And that's why he's down here, relegated to the corner like the petulant child he is. Number 7, Miles Mayhem from Mask. Alright, here's where our villainous leaders start getting slightly more competent. Miles here never really succeeded in his plans, but he constantly almost succeeded. To be fair, Cobra almost always got the upper hand at first too, but at least when Miles lost his advantage, it was because Mask was beating him, or because Scott and T-Bob stumbled onto the key to beating him while being kidnapped or almost dying. Overall though, his plans could probably have been more successful across the series. He was obviously smart enough to come up with some great schemes, not to mention somehow being the world's most effective historian and archaeologist. I mean, he found so many lost artifacts over the series, he could have made his fame and fortune that he wanted working for the Discovery Channel. In the end, he's down this low for a couple of key reasons though. specifically his desire for money rather than power, like a true megalomaniac, and the fact that he only ever had a handful of henchmen. Hey Miles, you'd probably have a better chance beating Mask once in a while if you had more than 3 goons. Number 6. Doc Terror from the Centurions. Doc Terror, what a villain. He was mean, evil, intelligent, and ruthless. In more than one episode, he did everything he could to destroy the whole freaking planet, often very nearly succeeding. Now that's villainy. Of course, it was also pretty stupid, as they never once suggested he had a plan for where to go or how to survive in the event he actually did destroy the planet. Maybe he was thinking about going full robot, who knows? Whatever his plan was, it couldn't save him from not breaking into the top 5 on this list. His schemes were grand and epic, and his goals were often evil for the sake of being evil, and that's some good villainy. But they also seemed like plans from which no one was really going to benefit. I'll give him all the respect he deserves for basically doing everything himself, considering Hacker was generally less helpful than his other brainless robots. But at the end of the day, his plots didn't ever really make much sense. Plus, one time his grand scheme involved mind-controlling whales with organ music. Number 5. Overlord from Spiral Zone. And now we enter an entirely different class of villain. Here's where we start talking about the ones that have actually managed to take over a good portion of the world, or galaxy, or whatever. Overlord here is probably one of the most effective, while simultaneously most forgotten, villains of 80's action cartoons. Spiral Zone is a lost gem of the 80's, and Overlord was the big bad behind it all. Before anyone even realized he was a villain, he'd already activated his own generator things and covered half the planet with his free will zapping, making people gross-looking gas stuff. Or whatever it was. The science behind it was never really explained that well. Regardless, he was one of the only people able to function on their own in this zone, which gave him half the world's population as a workforce, or at times even as a military force. Kinda makes you wonder how he was constantly being beaten by just 5 soldiers with resources like that. But he was, and that keeps him down here at number 5. Number 4. Chiron from Robotech. Okay, so Chiron wasn't the leader of the Zentradi, and he wasn't a representative of the Robotech Masters. He was just a commander, and one that most of his superiors hated at that. But he is representative of the military that killed off all but about 700,000 humans in the first Robotech War. He was the meanest, most brutal warmonger out of a huge armada of mean and brutal warmongers. He was constantly leading his forces in battles throughout the first series of Robotech that killed off dozens of humans and threatened the last hope of the entire species. He was a strong tactician and didn't care how many of his own troops or ships he lost as long as he put a dent in his enemy. That made him a good leader, in the villainous sense, and a dangerous one for the crew of the SDF-1. You could even make an argument that he won since, spoiler alert for a 35-year-old show, he destroyed the ship and killed most of his crew at the end of the first series. Too bad for Chiron, he died in the process. Leading a successful attack gets him high on the list. Not surviving to enjoy the victory keeps him at number 4. Number 3. Hordak from She-Ra, Princess of Power. And here he is, pretty much Skeletor, but much more successful and with an exponentially better voice. Ironic that the two of them are so closely related in the She-Ra He-Man mythology. But where Skeletor was an incompetent loser most of the time, Hordak rules all of Etheria. He's already won, and now he's dealing with the heroes as a rebel force rather than a deterrent, which is why he's up toward the top. Before there was a She-Ra, he just kinda rolled through and took everything he wanted. He's got an entire army under his control, which is way ahead of what most of the others on this list have. He's just a good leader, backed up by the evidence of his effectiveness. And for those of you who think that She-Ra is not an 80's action cartoon because it was targeted at girls and the toys were more doll than action figure, at the end of the day, the show is exactly the same as He-Man, except more hardcore because they were fighting to regain their world instead of just protecting it. Every one of us may have loved He-Man, but She-Ra definitely had just as much to offer. Number 2. The Queen of the Crown from The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers. The Queen of the Crown already rules an empire. Big one. She controls a large chunk of the entire galaxy and has a huge military under her command. She's also a ridiculously powerful psychic. She doesn't even bother fighting the heroes in the series because she only ever interacts with them by projecting through one of her slaver lord puppets. She's smart, powerful, and completely evil. In terms of leadership ability and effectiveness, she's probably leaps and bounds ahead of anyone else on this list. The only problem is that all of that is somewhat wasted in the show. She never makes any concerted attempt to take over the Earth, but you get the sense she could do fairly easily. And she has trouble dealing with a 5-person hero team. She should call Prince Lothar and start a support group for villains who can't beat 5 humans. Lothar, and Overlord, and Zoltar, and Sawboss. There were a lot of cartoons in the 80s with a 5-person hero roster. The Queen of the Crown especially didn't have an excuse for not winning, though. After all, her human enemies didn't even have a Voltron. Number 1. Megatron from the Transformers. Did he control the most territory of the entries on this list? No. Did he rack up significantly more victories? Also no. Were his plans and schemes more intricate and effective than those of his peers that I've already mentioned? Nope, they sure weren't. So why, you may ask, is Megatron at number 1? Well, because he's Megatron. It's kind of hard to quantify what it is that makes him such a great villain, but he definitely is. There's no question that he leads the Decepticons, as he's always quick to put down any dissent. He's driven and conquest-obsessed and has burning hatred for the Autobots. He's just a true personification of a villain leader in the 80s. He's essentially claimed the top spot because he simply feels like he belongs here. That, and he'd probably be the last one standing in any villain face-off. He's just that good a character. And now he can rub it in Prime's face that I put him at number 1, and Optimus didn't even break the top 5. And that's my list of the top 10 80s action cartoon villain leaders. For the record, I know I call these lists top 10-ish, and so far they've both actually been 10, but I promise there will be some coming that aren't, so just hold on a little while, and the title will actually be pertinent. Anyway, post your own thoughts about the list and the characters on it below. Tell me who I missed or how you'd change the order, because I'm interested to hear. Like the big YouTube kids say, like, comment, subscribe, bell. If you like what I'm turning out here, there's more on the way. So stay tuned, and stay tuned, as in cartoon, because animation. Later.